Okie dokie. Hi there. I hope the audio quality is okay. My name is Olivia Skinner. I just want to take a brief little moment here to introduce myself, go over the topic I'm going to be getting into today. So I am from Washington State, a small town that nobody's ever heard of if you've never been to Washington State. But it's just outside of Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. Beautiful, very green up here. I'm pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Communications with the Starbucks College Achievement Program as a barista. And I am going to be talking to you today about the leadership style that I received when I took the quiz, which I found to be delegating or the laissez-faire style. And I'm going to get into that a little bit and talk about the degree to which I agree with that or disagree and a little bit more about that. All right, so let's just get right on into it. Right. So as you can see up at the top here as well, when I took the leadership quiz, the result I received was the delegating or laissez-faire, which is definitely one characterized by indirect involvement. This kind of leader is one that steps back and trusts that the team members are going to live up to expectations, that whoever they assign the task is going to just complete the work. It's the most hands-off leadership approach. Um, and this kind of leadership I read is most effective when the employee subordinates are motivated, when they're driven to succeed, um, when these people are particularly capable, either through knowledge or experience or just their own merit and creativity. And then a little bit of further reading I found as far as an outside source that I was able to locate was this article I found on the website of the NIH, with the National Library of Medicine. And the article is titled "The Dark and Bright Side of Laissez-Faire Communication," which I found to be an interesting read, and certainly one that is, on topic. So it kind of talks about this leadership style being somewhat misunderstood, that there are certainly disadvantages, some advantages as well. And it covers a study where they looked at a goal, or the goal orientations of the subordinates and the type of communication that the leadership did use, um, and how each of those components kind of affect the effectiveness of this style. So the article starts out with an introduction that kind of describes the general perception of this style in the scientific community, how it's considered to be, by some, the absence of leadership, being very little involved, but definitely the most passive uh, leadership style. To summarize the findings, I would say the general consensus seems to be that it is least effective as an approach when employees perceive the directives they're given to be something that's a hindrance to their goal, what they called a hindrance appraisal. So it went on to identify what type of subordinate this style might be most effective with. And what they found was these employees that were oriented or goal oriented to hide their incompetence or failures did well under the style, which isn't really surprising. Say that there's someone who is not really doing well, or they aren't motivated to do very well, or they don't know how to do anything. That is something that they would not want to share with their manager. And so that it would make sense that this hands off sort of style would be preferable to them, which they refer to as the performance avoid goal orientation. But then on the flip side, there, they also mentioned that employees that were motivated to be seen as successful or impressive to their leadership were also very comfortable with this style because it allowed them to kind of stand out as someone who's particularly effective at their job. Managers were happy to have this kind of employee under this leadership style, and that orientation was called the performance prove goal orientation, that they wanted to prove their manager that they're effective. So there's some interesting findings there for sure. And okay, on the next slide, I kind of took into account here how I feel about myself and how I think that this style might apply to any leadership roles I might be taking on. I wanted to put up this little disclaimer here, that I don't necessarily have a large well of experience to draw on for leadership in any recent organizations that I've been a part of. Like I said, I'm a barista. I'm not a supervisor. I'm pretty comfortable with my role as a subordinate in my workplace. But from what I would guess, I would think that it's this style and result is probably somewhat true in a hypothetical scenario, because I would want to be a leader that shows confidence in my team members, a leader that allows for um, like freedoms to get the job done as my team members would see fit, you know, where that is warranted, of course, where my team members are, again, going back to the last slide, motivated, capable, knowledgeable, a good team. And I would also want to take into account that my subordinates are wanting that style of leadership, and I wrote here appropriate, um, that they would prefer to complete their tasks independently and just have me as kind of a delegator, or if they would prefer me to be a little bit more hands-on of a leader. Um, but either way, I don't think that I would be comfortable in any leadership role being the person who makes every decision on behalf of everybody. I don't think that that sort of authoritarian autocratic style is my prerogative. I definitely don't want to be the one calling all of the shots just as the final say, so to speak. Okay, but all that being said, I think that I would probably attempt as a leader to lean in more to the democratic style, because I think that's a good middle of the road intention for me to have that is characterized more by actively consulting the team, being an active participant. I would prefer as a leader to be more of that guide, ultimately making the call, but definitely not leading without support and counsel from my team. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Here, get my bubble out of the way here. On this slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some components that I think are in alignment of the manager direct report communication styles and like relationships of superiors and subordinates from our reading in chapter 7. It is my understanding that the delegating laissez-faire approach is characterized by that distance and by stepping back. And I think that that would probably manifest in the overseer kind of relationship, a very low leadership membership exchange. What I would suspect here, give me a sec, I lost my place in my notes. There we go. Okay. Here, yes. What I would suspect is that the minimal or no social interaction or contact would probably be most fitting of the delegation style, only prioritizing that sort of formal instrumental tasking. Okay. And then I also wanted to briefly touch on what I think would be my preferred leadership style manifesting as far as these organizational relationships go. Again, I'm hoping that any role I would be taking on would be characterized more by consultation, one that like fosters my team to have trust within me, that I won't become either overbearing or distant. With the democratic style leadership, I think that it is more compatible with these kinds of relationships, these middle ground or partnership relationships, within those that would encourage my team member to see me as a resource, somebody approachable. I obviously think maintaining an appropriate professional boundary where it's needed is going to be critical to the organization's success. But I would prefer that my employees know that I think of them as full people who can come to me. I would suspect that this kind of relationship here would decrease the likelihood of upward distortion. I wouldn't want them to not tell me how they truly feel about whatever XYZ work-related topic out of insecurity for their position or intimidation. And as a manager, I would obviously have the final say, but prefer everybody to know that they have their own agency. I wonder if it just went to sleep there. Okay, on the next slide, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about potential downfalls to both leadership styles that I've been talking about. All right, let's start with laissez-faire here. Where this style is going to be most effective is where team members, again, are highly motivated or skilled. And then on the flip side, it's going to be most ineffective when team members have low motivation or poor skills. For example, within my own workplace, as a barista at Starbucks, there's a wide range of employees with like different alignments to our cultural values who I work with. I would say that my team is a really, really good one, and most of us genuinely really care about providing great products, good service, when we are able to do so, of course. But we've been trying to hire lately, and what my manager has been running into or finding out about a lot of our applicants is that most of them seem to really just be desiring to meet the bare minimum requirements of having a job, which I don't want to pass judgment onto. It's not necessarily a bad thing, especially where entering the workforce is extremely difficult these days. Jobs are paying less, aside the point. But this kind of leadership style is not going to be effective for those new hires who would not be as motivated to see the team succeed as the rest of us are. Maybe somebody who's a little bit younger who doesn't have the experience or the skills needed to thrive yet in a work environment. They would need a much more direct hands-on leader. Anyway, another way that this style can fail is if a manager is expecting a task to be completed by an employee who is ill-matched to that task. What that might look like, and what I mean by that is, for example, if you assign a critical task to an individual who's maybe stronger in other areas. Let's take my workplace for an example. Excuse me. If we are in a rush in the morning and it's important to have our drinks made as fast as possible, as quality as possible, then the person that we're going to want to be doing that and making the drinks would be somebody who is skilled in that area. And so an appropriate delegation of that task would be to assign someone who is very strong there. And an inappropriate delegation of that task would be to assign someone not as strong there, especially in a critical moment, and then perhaps being critical of that person when expectations aren't met. And then the quiz site also mentioned here that it's important for leaders to remain connected so that they can be ready for responsiveness purposes to any situation that might arise. As far as people go, they are just going to be, they're always changing. People are dynamic. The support needs of any team as well, I believe, are going to shift. So you are going to need to be available to a degree and not so hands off and remote for those moments where the team's going to need more direction. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about potential barriers to my preferred leadership style, things that I think that I would want to be as a leader and that I would need to keep in mind here. Just the site mentioned that when you are actively consulting everybody, executive tasks may become really tedious and very hard to get through an efficient way. Like you're checking in with going through all of the process, a democracy. It's very much like making sure we have everybody on board, a lot of maybe sitting around deciding things, getting everybody to agree that might not be the most efficient use of time. So it's my understanding here that effective leaders are going to use their judgment and discretion on which issues that they do need to consult everybody on, and which issues might just be easier to make an executive decision on, just to, probably little things, just simple decisions. So those are potential barriers to the democratic style. And that is just about all the content I have for the moment. So I hope that all made sense. The quality is okay. My notes got a little mixed up there. So I hope that that was pretty consistent. Just to kind of review here, I talked in my presentation about my results from the assessment being the delegating style and kind of a brief analysis where I agree in some areas and disagree in others. I also talked about the democratic leadership style, which I think is something I would want to adhere more to. I think that the characteristics they align better with my values, and kind of went over the characteristics of both of those leadership styles. And then in the next couple slides, I had tried to bring in the types of relationships that I think might apply in each style, the degree of leadership member exchange, um, the types of relationships there, and kind of wrapped it up with the potential barriers and downfalls to each style there that one would need to be aware of to utilize those approaches to the best of their abilities. And then there is a brief little list of references that I used. Feel free to check out the article that I mentioned if you're interested. I will warn you, it's a little bit of a dense read, but it certainly applies to our course material there. Okie dokie. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you in the replies. And alrighty.